Hi, Savvy Sales community. The last video, I introduced you to a negotiation secret for selling. If you haven't watched it yet, you can find it right above. So today, you're going to learn one trap that I'm guessing you've heard from the buyer on more than one occasion. I'll give you the clue on what to do, so keep watching. Hi, I'm Christine Harrington, the Savvy Sales Lady, your personal YouTube sales coach, providing you free coaching videos so you can increase your sales. Now, negotiations are more about understanding how the decision-making process is made. It doesn't mean compromise, it means avoiding traps, so that you can help the buyer negotiate his or her own decision-making process. So let's dive into the first trap called the status quo. I'm always skeptical when someone expresses that they have no biases because they're not being honest with themselves or others. Research proves we all have biases, and those biases influence our choices. As a matter of fact, biases are so strong towards alternatives, it generates the status quo decision. Here's an example. My guess is you have prospects who have long-term business relationships with their current vendor. Even though the prospect has ongoing issues with the current vendor and your product or service is a better solution, the buyer will not leave the current vendor. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not logical, right? You're right, it's not logical. It's emotional. Enter status quo. When the buyer decides to just stay with his current vendor and just stand with the status quo, he's basing it on emotion. It represents not only a safer course, but breaking the status quo to him means taking action. Taking action that opens the buyer to criticism and perhaps regret if the decision doesn't work out. So the buyer doesn't want the responsibility and instead protects his or her ego. That's why the buyer will respond with something like, well, I'll tell you what, I'll rethink it and I'll get back to you. Well, they never do they? What can you do? First, remind the buyer of the objectives and walk through how to examine how they will be served by staying the status quo. Show the barriers of the status quo that block them from their goals. Number two, balance with the buyer other alternatives by using counterbalances and evaluating all the plus and minuses. Ask yourself, would you choose the status quo alternative if in fact it weren't the status quo? Then discuss this with the buyer. 3, offer reassurance and a plan to the buyer that avoids disruption, effort, and cost by switching to your product and service. This will help the buyer not exaggerate the fear in his mind. 4, when comparing alternatives, always evaluate in terms of the future as well as the present, reminding the buyer that the desirability of keeping the status quo will change over time. When presenting different alternatives, the buyer may have a hard time picking the best alternative, which also may cause him to default back to the status quo. Give him your best recommendation, while at the same time, look for other opportunities to anchor his decision by circling back to solving the issues. Remind him of that. So I'm challenging you this week. Notice your decision-making process and examine when you settle for the status quo decision. This will give you valuable insight into how the buyer is feeling and making his or her decisions. Now, there are 3 more traps which I'll cover in upcoming videos. But if this video has helped you, will you give it a thumbs up and share it with others? Also, hit the subscribe button and notification bell so you don't miss the upcoming videos. And I'll see you on the next coaching video.